So in this first video, I'd like to show you a little bit about getting around in Excel. So again, if you've used Excel, this might be a lot of review, but just so that we're all on the same page. So here I have a data set, and you'll notice that it's split up into different columns where each column has a different title. So you might think of this entire sheet as being a data set. And then each particular column is one variable in this data set. So this data set includes the title of a movie, a result, which I'll talk about later. This has to do with something called the Bechdel test. The Bechdel test just simply assesses the role of women in the movie, and there's three different criteria. For this particular data set, somebody went through and assessed how this movie did with relation to the Bechdel test, in which categories it passed. There's a variable called pass, which just says, like, if it had a full pass, it passed all three criteria, failed if it didn't, and then there's some monetary variables as well in this data set. When you're using data, maybe you're creating your own data set, it's always a good habit to give each of your variables a title, and your title should be what's going on the first column. Now the fact that these are all bolded isn't necessary to be a title, but it does help kind of break it up from the rest of the data so you can see it clearly as being different. When we talk about using RStudio and importing our data into RStudio, another thing that's important is having column titles or variable titles that are no more than one word, that they don't have any spaces in them. So it's also a good habit now to create titles where you don't have extra spaces. So either just limiting it to one word or using something like an underscore to connect two words like that. A couple other things. One of them is this value box up here. So this shows you what is entered in that cell. So if you're just looking at a straight up inputted value, it's going to just show what you can already see there. Sometimes in Excel, as we'll talk about in one of the next videos, is creating formulas. So what you might see in the spreadsheet is a value, but what might actually be in the value box is a formula that's producing that value. So for example, if I wanted to find the average of a certain range of cells here, I'll just pick kind of a random range. You'll notice that what I see in the spreadsheet is a value, but what's actually in that cell is a formula. A couple other things, so you might be used to just kind of clicking around when you're working on your computer. Maybe you've used Excel before and that's something you're used to doing. But I'd encourage you to use the Enter key on your computer whenever you're clicking out of cells, at least whenever you're using formulas, because when you're using formulas, if you click out of a cell, you might accidentally reference a different cell depending on where you're clicked on in the value box or the formula bar. So I would just encourage you to use the Enter key to go down and then the Tab key to go to the right. You can also use your arrow keys on your keyboard as well. So again, that's really only important if you're using formulas and you just want to be careful that you don't input something into your formula by accident. And then the last thing I'm going to show you in this video is stretching out your columns or your rows, but especially your columns. So you'll notice that here we have all of these number signs because the value in these cells actually doesn't fit the width that's presented here. So what we need to do is widen this column, and you can either do this by manually dragging the column like that. Something else you can do, which I think is cool, is you can double click on the border there and it will automatically readjust the column to just fit everything in the smallest width possible. So either way, you just want to make sure that all of your columns, you can see all the values in them and they're not crowding any values unnecessarily. I could do the same thing with this title column over here. So for example, not all these movie titles are quite fitting in that range, so I could double click it and it will make it the appropriate length. It will make it the shortest width possible that will fit everything completely.